What if Obi-Wan saved Darth Vader? Let's begin today's story during the Kenobi show, when Obi-Wan and Vader face off in a duel of the generation. This was master against apprentice, and although they hadn't seen each other in over a decade, the familiarity between the two was strong. Vader swung with purpose, trying to gain revenge on his old master for slicing him down on Mustafar and sentencing him to a life in confinement inside the suit. Vader was more powerful than Kenobi, but he let his arrogance and hatred for the man take over, and he overextended his attacks, allowing Obi-Wan to slice through the Dark Lord's helmet and reveal half of his face. Initially, Kenobi had come to kill Vader, to overcome his mistake 10 years earlier, to leave his apprentice alive and create the man before him. However, the second he saw his old friend's eyes and heard his voice speak to him, he knew that he had to do everything in his power to ensure that Anakin would come back to the light. Obi-Wan speaks to Vader and tries to reason with him, telling him he is sorry for everything. Vader was broken, and Kenobi could see this when he looked into the eyes of his old friend. In the show, when Vader's helmet was destroyed for a brief few seconds when Obi-Wan is speaking to Vader, his eyes had reverted back to their normal color, not shining Sith yellow. I truly believe that in this moment, if Obi-Wan really pushed and spoke to Vader, he could have turned him back into Anakin. Obi-Wan would draw upon anything he could. He mentioned Padme and Qui-Gon, even referring to him as Anakin, all of the things that would remind the Dark Lord of his previous life before all this hatred and anger. Kenobi condemned the Jedi and said that they were wrong, and that it was because of their rigid ways that he ended up like this. Obi-Wan could see that cracks were starting to break through Vader, and perhaps he was making some progress. But the one thing that broke through was when he mentioned his mother Shmi. Tears began to stream down Anakin's face when he heard Obi-Wan talk about his mother. The master told his old apprentice what his mother would think of his actions, how she would react learning that her son has caused all this chaos, that he has taken mothers away from their children like she was taken from him. Anakin's mouth gaped open and he was speechless. Vader told Kenobi that it was too late for him, he didn't have a place in the light anymore. But Obi-Wan assured him that it wasn't too late and he can still come back to the light and help them destroy the Emperor. In this moment, Darth Vader would turn back to the light and become Anakin Skywalker again. Obi-Wan had saved him. With Anakin on their side again, Obi-Wan knew that it was time to properly rejoin the fight against the Empire. He had been hidden for far too long and his talents were being wasted. Obi-Wan would take Anakin to Alderaan as he needed to speak with Bail. The first few days especially, they had to be cautious with Anakin, but Obi-Wan was over the moon. He couldn't fully forgive his old friend for the damage he has caused, but forgiveness is a Jedi trait. Anakin waits in the ship. He has to remain hidden. He was still in his terrifying and recognizable armor that would cause anyone in the galaxy to tremble in fear. Obi-Wan speaks with Bail and tells him the events that have just occurred. Organa was understandably concerned and frightened, but most of all, nervous about the fact that he was so close to Leia. But Bail trusted his friend and arranged for the best droids on Alderaan to change Vader from his demonic, painful suit into a less dark side oriented suit. The operation would happen immediately, and Anakin would be geared up with only a respirator covering his mouth, allowing everything except his mouth and nose to be freely exposed. The needles that were plunged into Anakin's skin to cause him more unnecessary pain were removed, and his dark exterior became adorned in a white alloy. Although it wasn't ideal to wear a respirator, Anakin's new suit felt like a dream. He was comfortable as you can get after a decade in living in so much pain that it was impossible to sleep. His deep breathing was muted, heavy armor weighing him down significantly reduced, and the constant pain on the interior was released. Even Bail could notice a significant shift and remembered his old friend Anakin from during the Clone Wars. Bail and Obi-Wan discussed at length, telling Anakin everything. Bail was more cautious and wary, bringing up the dangers of telling Anakin that Padme's children survived and that he is a father. But Obi-Wan disagreed, telling him the whole reason they're in this mess was because he felt like the Jedi didn't trust him. If they hide more things from him and he finds out later, he would boil up in rage. Organa finally agreed, and Obi-Wan would tell Anakin the events that happened after Mustafar, with Padme giving birth and the children being hidden. Expecting a large and animated reaction, Kenobi had prepared for the worst, but all Anakin did was place his face in his hands and begin to cry. He had wasted 10 years of his life being a murderous tyrant instead of a loving father. He had ruined everything. For the first time since he turned back to the light, he mentioned Padme, telling Obi-Wan that she would be so disappointed in him. He pleads with Obi-Wan to meet them. He needs to right his wrongs and become the father that Padme always believed he would be. Anakin will meet Leia on Alderaan. Leia was a smart and witty child. Drawing comparisons to her mother Padme, he saw the resemblance immediately. Leia was shocked and confused and didn't really believe it. Bail told her that she would be going with Obi-Wan and her father for the time being, and that she would be safe with them. She was adamant to leave Alderaan, but she was pleased that she would get more time with Obi-Wan, picturing this as a holiday. They travel to Tatooine, where Anakin goes to the moisture farm he visited over a decade earlier. Owen was not at all pleased and cursed at Obi-Wan for bringing more people around his child. He didn't realize that this was Anakin, believing him to be dead. Owen had always been protective of Luke, so much so that he restricted Obi-Wan from seeing him. But now Kenobi had arrived to take Luke, something he felt so wrong about in his heart. Owen had no power in the situation, and Luke Skywalker went with them. Luke was far more accepting than Leia. He had always wondered about his father and who he was, and now he knew. Obi-Wan and Anakin would begin training Luke and Leia in the ways of the Force. This would take a long time. The twins were 10 years old at this point, and their training drew many resemblances to Anakin when he was a boy, leaving his mother at the age of 9 and going to a distant place with people he didn't know to learn the sacred art of the Force. Beginning their training this late was prohibited. However, they are the children of the Chosen One, which means that the Force comes more naturally to them. They are able to rise the ranks of what would be the Jedi Order, remaining in the skill level of younglings for only months and proceeding to become Padawans. Neither Obi-Wan or Vader trained Luke or Leia more. Each session was the 4 of them, practicing their abilities. This was as much training for Obi-Wan and Anakin as it was for the children. Kenobi, who hadn't really used a lightsaber and the Force in 10 years, was able to realign himself with the Force and continue to study its powers. Anakin had a more difficult task of thwarting the dark side abilities and memories from his mind and focus on the light. Luke and Leia grew powerful very quickly. It wouldn't take long for them to receive their first lightsabers and begin training. Luke would gain access to an emerald kyber crystal, whilst Leia was adorned with a sapphire blue. They would train together every day, even after hours when Anakin thought they were asleep. They weren't Jedi. They practically didn't align with any of the code's guidelines. Luke and Leia had many attachments in their life, and Obi-Wan had now learned that it was best to not get rid of these attachments, but instead teach their Padawans how to control them. This meant that Anakin could have a proper father-child relationship with his kids, and Luke was still able to call home on Tatooine and talk to his aunt and uncle. If they were at the temple, these outlets for the kids would have been completely severed. After almost 8 years of training Luke and Leia, they had grown unbelievably powerful. Leia was better in combat, her strength and lightsaber abilities outweighing that of Luke. But Luke's connection to the Force was something of a myth, growing further than Anakin's ever did before his injuries. Together, the children of Skywalker had the combined strength of some of the most powerful Jedi Masters in history. They were ready. Throughout this time, Palpatine had assumed that Vader died at the hands of Kenobi. There was no other explanation for this sudden disappearance. Obi-Wan would tell Bail Organa that they are coming back to fight alongside the rebellion. This was a good thing, but also something that was very difficult to convince the leaders of the rebels. A private meeting was set up, where the 4 Force users would sit down with the leaders, including Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Admiral Akbar, and several other key members. The issue was Vader. To them, that's all he was. Darth Vader, the man who murdered millions and destroyed the Jedi. They didn't have the context and history that Obi-Wan did. This was a long meeting where Obi-Wan and Anakin explained how he had changed and spent the better part of 10 years becoming a different person. Bail advocated for this and said that second chances should be awarded and his talents are too great to be put to waste. The final decision was that Anakin could help them fight the Empire, but once the Empire is defeated, he must lead the Republic and live in exile. His atrocities cannot be ignored. Anakin accepted these terms and joined the rebellion. With Anakin, Obi-Wan, and 2 of the most powerful Force apprentices on their side, they had to mount an attack now. There was no point in waiting around. The Empire, including Sidious and his new apprentice, Darth Maul, have mounted their base on the planet Scarif. They were only weeks away from completing the Death Star, and once that happened, they would become unstoppable. The issue that the rebellion was facing was that they didn't have enough troops. Even if they launched a full-scale invasion, the stormtroopers would outnumber them significantly. Anakin was sitting idle in the corner, not wanting to draw attention to himself. But when this was being discussed amongst the rebels, he had an idea that he believed would help. He stands and begins to speak. Everyone fell dead silent, not out of fear, but pure interest in what he had to say. The reception of Vader joining the rebels was varied. Those who had direct connections to people who died at his hand hated him being around, but others thought that his tactical brilliance would severely help. Anakin recalls back to the Clone Wars during a mission when they visited an abandoned droid factory, and the owner had reprogrammed the droids to help follow his commands. He essentially had his own droid army. Anakin explained that if they go back to an old factory, such as Geonosis, they could reprogram the droids to help their invasion. Someone made a backhanded remark that they had become the Separatists using droids, and the Empire was the Republic using clones. The rebels do think that his plan is worth a shot. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Luke, and Leia would travel to the abandoned Geonosian factory, where thousands of unused droids were sitting idle with dust all over them. Going to the control room, they're able to reprogram them. Anakin was always good at using things. He spent his entire childhood rebuilding droids and programming them to his liking. It was ironic that his later life would be focused entirely on destroying them. They were able to gain access to thousands of droids and their equipment, placing them on a ship and piloting it back to the rebel fleet. This was a risky plan, and they were trusting the Jedi's abilities in reprogramming these droids, but if they didn't do this, then the Death Star would be created and they would all die. The entire rebellion force invades Scarif alongside the droid army. The droids were the first to be launched into combat, with rows of thousands taking the heavy fire, whilst the rebel fleet and tanks come behind them. The Jedi land on the beaches and begin to slice their way through the stormtroopers. Anakin, with his white lightsaber, created from unbleeding his previous kyber crystal, sliced through all of the troopers with elegance. He was here to gain revenge on Palpatine. The fight was massive and would decide the fate of the galaxy. The Jedi find Sidious and Maul in the Imperial Center, looking out across the battle. Sidious was furious to see Vader. He never expected his weakness to drop so far that he turned back to the light. The Sith ignite their lightsabers and leap towards the Jedi. Sidious knew all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, which means that he was the most powerful being that they had faced to date. Very quickly, Sidious was able to chop Obi-Wan's hand off and send him flying backwards. He was too old for this level of combat and wasn't as proficient as he was during the Clone Wars. Luke and Leia dueled Maul, the dark Zabrak Sith that wielded a double-bladed lightsaber. The twins combined their strength, Luke focusing on using his force powers whilst Leia distracted Maul with her proficient lightsaber skills. Maul hadn't expected this level of power from someone so young, and it reminded him of when he fought Ahsoka Tano when she was only 17 years old. As the two got the upper hand on Maul, they killed him. Joining their father, they helped him fight Sidious. Since Anakin joined the fight, his powers had only increased. He wasn't focused on serving anger and hatred, and instead found a new motivator in fighting for his kids. Together, he and his children attacked from all sides, defending when necessary, but also throwing fierce attacks at Sidious. Sidious didn't know what to do. He was losing and couldn't defend himself. Luke was able to push Sidious into Leia, who sliced his leg and caused him to drop to the floor, and Anakin delivered the final blow, killing Darth Sidious. Soon after, the rest of Scarif would fall before the rebels and they won the battle. Obi-Wan was rushed to a medical bay where he was given a prosthetic arm and repaired to full health. With the Empire's defeat on Scarif, their leaders were destroyed and much of the Stormtrooper army had fallen. The rebellion storms Coruscant, where they forcefully take over the Senate from other parties trying to secure control. They establish the New Republic and restore peace to the galaxy. As for Anakin, he lived up to his end of the bargain, and he would leave the Republic forever, traveling to the outskirts of the galaxy. Obi-Wan and his children followed him, and together they decided to begin the new Jedi Order. A daunting task, but one that together they can achieve. Anakin had found happiness again, and although he didn't have Padme, he had their children, and he had fulfilled the promise he made to himself almost a decade earlier of becoming the father she always knew he could be. If you enjoyed today's video, you must watch What If Anakin Reached His Full Potential and What If Anakin and Vader Were Different People. Please check out our membership page if you would like to support the channel. It really helps us out. Thank you all for watching, and may the Force be with you.